So you bought one of our laser design kits and now you're wondering, how do I paint it? Well, this is Laura from Grain & Company, and today I'm going to go through all of the steps we take when we are finishing our laser cut kits. You can refer back to this video for all of the information I give you, but let's get started. So I've got all of my pieces here. I've got my stain and paint colors, I've got a brush, I've got some makeup sponges, I have some baby wipes, and all of that is going to be used in doing this particular design. So how I get started is I like to think about how I'm going to paint and what colors I'm going to use. So that way, as I'm doing one color, I can do all of the pieces in that color as I go. So I'm going to start with separating all of the colors I need for my white. So this background and this background are all white. My Home Sweet Home base is white and my windmill is white. So right now I'm gonna actually leave it in that template. And you'll find by painting in these templates, it helps prevent the paint going down the sides of your design. Now I'm just going to put some tape on the back here because I am going to need to remove the tape that we put on the front so we can take them out of the machine and not have pieces all over the place. So first of all, then you'll take that tape off, and now with the tape on the back, it will keep them in. But I need to just mask off the rest of the pieces because once I go to paint it white, I don't want it to get on the other pieces. Now, yes, I could take it out and just paint that one separately. I could put some tape on the table, but I do like to make sure that I just like to paint it in the template. I just find it easier. So that one is there. So these ones we're just going to separate into our stained pile. So for our stain, we're going to do the round part here. Where's the rest of it? This part here is going to have the front is going to be stained. So now I've got these other pieces in here, so I'm actually going to take them out. But once again, so my other pieces don't fall out, I'm just going to tape the back, and then I can take that out there. So let's back that up. There and there. So now I can take this off. And those will pop right out. And we'll use those templates that they're in after to paint those. All right, so now when I go to take off this one here, it's gonna take all those inner pieces, which is great because we don't need those, so we can just get rid of them. Now, at any point and you're taking something apart and a piece isn't coming out, it's probably because when it cuts on the machine, it didn't go through all the way, and we do our best to catch all of those before we put them in your kits. But for some reason, we happen to miss one. An X-Acto knife will work where you'll just come in on the back side and just gently cut your way through it, and then that should be good enough for you there. So, okay, so this piece is stained, this piece is stained. Come back over here and put some tape on the letters. I'm actually going to take the arrow out because it'll be easier to stain with it out. So take all this. Now I would reuse this tape on the back, but because it's been on the wood front, it tends to get little splinters and it doesn't stick very well to the slippery or the shiny back of the adhesive. So unfortunately I can't reuse that. So now I'm going to pop that one out and that one is going to be stained. Okay, so that's my stain pile. Then the last pile I'll need, these ones also are going to be stained, so we'll stick those over there for now. This one here is cut in its template. So as you can see, where's my other one? This is the background. Now, sometimes depending on how the details are cut, whether or not we include them in a template or we just leave you the words separately, you'll use that as your guide. So this one would just sit over top and it will line up all the letters on top of these score marks. You can also hand place them over the score marks. That's what's there as well, depending on how we prepare your kit. So that one's getting painted white. These will get painted gray. So I will put that over there. This will get put over there. And these ones will also get painted gray, but we'll do that after I finish painting that one and I pop it out. Okay, so I'm going to show you couple different ways on how we paint our backgrounds. Okay, so for example, on the shiplap lined one, now my goal is to try not to fill in these lines because you want to be able to see that, and that's where the baby wipe comes into play. Yes, you can paint with baby wipes and you can paint with them, and we're also going to clean up the edges with them. So you'll grab your white paint, and I like to double fold it so it doesn't seep quite right through onto my finger. We are using water-based acrylic, so you can easily clean your finger up after when you're done, but you're going to take your baby wipe, dip it in a little bit of paint, and if you have too much on or a big blob, then just kind of blot it off, and you're just going to wipe on that top surface. Now, doing it this way might take you an extra coat on the white just because it's doing a very thin application. But that way, as you skim over those lines, you're not filling it with paint. Now, when you're doing this, you might find that going one way might get a little bit more splintery. Yeah, it's fine. You can take your sandpaper ahead of time and give it a really light sanding to help with that. But I'm just going from one side to the other. Now, as you do that, you want to just pay special attention to the edges. You don't want to get so much paint going over the edges because you do want that to stay clean. But when we're done, we'll just grab another baby wipe and we will just come around and wipe any excess paint off if we did get some. So by painting this way on these things, this takes little time to dry because we're not putting a whole lot of paint. I'm wiping it on, remember, as you see that, and then making sure you go all the way across. That way you don't leave any stop and start marks and it looks like it's a little bit blotchy. Okay, so I did get a little bit of paint on here. I wanted to show you that. So I'm just taking a clean spot on my baby wipe, and you'll want to do this sooner rather than later because the longer it dries, the harder it is to come off. So as you can see, you're going to get a little bit of brown from the charring of the laser cut edges, but you're just going to keep going around and wiping any paint off that you see, and then just leave that to dry. So that is our first coat on there. This one, I can do it with a baby wipe as well, just because I don't want to get too much paint into those holes there. And you can do it with a brush if you want, but you're just going to want to come back and wipe that off there. So don't worry about filling in these score marks because they're going to get hidden anyways. Just wiping this on. This one's getting a little fuzzy because I'm actually going against the grain at the particular moment. I'm wiping it on, but my grain on this one is going up and down, so I'm just going to come back and wipe it after in that direction. see I'm not quite as careful with this one as I was the last one. But my only place that I'm trying to avoid is getting it in that groove. Alright, so just coming back. Your grain might go side to side, so you just have to watch in which direction that is going. And then once again, find a clean spot on your cloth and then just come around and check. See, this one's not too bad. I got the odd spot. And just wipe it off and then let that one dry as well. Okay, last background. So I'm just going to set that there. I'm going to paint this one with a brush. Put some paint on. You don't want a ton, and I like to start in the middle so that way I'm not having all that paint go on the edge. Now normally I would go side to side, but this particular one is cut green. It's going up and down, so I'm just going to go this way. And if you want to be like me right now and not be very neat about it, then you can go back with the baby wipe after. So you don't have to be quite as neat if you don't want to. You just know that the baby wipe can cover or wipe away all those mistakes after if you wish. So lay the paint and then pull those strokes across so that way you don't have any overlap marks. And just watch when you're touching the sides, because if you do have paint and then you go to handle it, you might get paint on other pieces. So all right, so I did this really messy just to show you, and I'm going to grab another one. Okay, so I'm just putting this on my fingers. So as you can see, it's actually not too bad. And then just wipe it off. Now as you're wiping, sometimes the charring part will come up the top edge, especially on a white, because you'll see that. It doesn't bother me. We're gonna do a little sanding. And I tend to distress my edges anyway, so it doesn't bother me if the charring comes in. Okay, so that one is done. Okay, so I'm gonna leave that one out, and then the next piece we're going to do is this piece. So with this piece, because it's in a template, you don't want to paint it with a brush because there's a chance that you can get some paint down the edges. You could wipe it with a baby wipe, and that's fine. You just want to make sure you blot off a lot of the paint before you wipe it on. But I find your makeup sponges will work best. So depending how big this surface area is, if I was to paint this area, I could take a larger sponge, dip it in paint, and then paint it that way. That's another option instead of just using the brush. But this time I'm going to use the makeup wedge here, the foam wedge. So as you can see, I've used this on a previous color, so I just let it dry, and then I take my scissors and I cut that off, and that way I can keep using this for little projects until it goes and it gets really, really small. So with this, I'm going to take my sponge, dip it in a little bit of paint, and then I'm going to come in here, my paper towel, and I'm going to blot a lot of that off. So I want it to be almost dry, and I'm just going to very gently tap the surface. Yeah, that way I'm just hitting the surface, I'm not pushing any paint down the sides, and that will dry really quickly as well. All right. Okay, so as I've gone through all of these, this is already dry. So I'm going to start with my first one. Now, because we've applied paint on here, it creates a really roughness because the grain has raised on the wood. So you'll have your fine sandpaper, ours are a 400 grit, and you're going to use that to sand in the direction of the grain to smooth that out. So when you're sanding, you should, once it's done, it should feel buttery smooth. All right, and then you can just take a piece of paper towel wipe. And I did forget to mention on this one, if for some reason as you're wiping your paint on with the baby wipe and you happen to get some paint in there, you can easily just go in there with a toothpick and you can clean that out right away when it's still wet. So that is an option for you if you happen to get some paint in there. So right now I'm just going to go back and sand all my pieces. You always want to sand in the direction of the grain if you can. Otherwise, sometimes, depending on the color, you can see obvious scratch marks going in the opposite direction. So, and then take that off. This one is, I'm going to let that one sit just a little longer, and this one is dry as well. And you'll notice after you do your first coats that, and you give it a sand, the paint will just apply a lot nicer. Now these ones in the template, once they've dried and you've sanded them, or within a few minutes, even if you don't sand them, just give them a little press. Make sure that even if you did get some paint on the sides, that they're not stuck in there, because you don't want this to get stuck from the paint. So that one can easily be moved, so that's great. So now we're gonna come back and do this again. So I'm gonna grab baby wipe, back in here, give my paint, and do this again. So as you can see, I'm doing the second coat. It's starting to get more white. That's great. And you can see I don't have a whole lot of paint on my baby wipe, and I like to start in the middle and push it from side to side, so that way I'm not flooding the sides with a whole bunch of paint at once. And it's easier to move the paint around when you start in the middle, because if you push it one way, push it the other way. And when you're doing it this way, you'll find you have a little bit more control over applying it, especially when you have like an engraved area, when you have something we've engraved and you don't want to fill in that detail. The baby wipes work really well for that. So now, if for some reason I did get some paint in there, like I said, you can take that toothpick and just run it through there, cleaning it off between each stroke. There's, and then once again, take your other baby wipe or a clean area, and then just go around in case you get any paint. These are pretty good, just the odd spot here. There we go. Okay, so that one is done. And then I'm going to go back and do this one. And this. See, now the second coat, now that my fibers are sanded down, when I'm going to do that, it doesn't get caught on my baby wipe as easily. So that's kind of nice, and you want to avoid that hole there. Okay, so take your baby wipe, get that off. Now, if it has had a chance to dry a little bit before you get there, you can always just scrub a little bit harder. Sometimes you might just need to take your nail in there and get that. Okay, so that one is done, and this one is dry now, but it's rough, so I'm going to give it a sand. And don't worry about on that first coat if you sand down just a little bit more. You really want to make sure that this is buttery smooth, because it will make it a lot easier paint, and then just feel it, make sure nothing feels rough. If it does, then go back and sand it again. Okay, and now my brush. So in between coats, always nice to have a little baggie there so you can put your brush in there so it doesn't have a chance to dry out. And if you can't get to painting all of it right away, then I just put your brush in some water and clean it off and start again after. All right, so I'm just gonna start here. Just laid it on, and then my final strokes just go all the way across so that way it evens out all of that paint. You just don't want to do that and then you can see all that extra paint in the middle. You want to smooth that out. Very gentle hand. It's already starting to dry, and then you have no brush strokes when it's dry. And then once again, baby wipe. Back, just check your edges a little bit. Give that a wipe. Okay. So quick. All right, this edge. Let's scrub a little bit. There we go. Oh, see, got my dirty little. So I'm just going to wipe that off. And all right, so this side is already dried a little bit. So I'm just going to come in with my nail over top, underneath that baby wipe, and just give it a little scrub. And now it's come off. There we go, just like that. So that part is good. Okay, so for the most part, 2 coats are gonna work for me. I'm gonna let them dry a little bit, and then I'll come back and give them a sand and see if I feel like I need a second or a third coat on those. I'm just gonna put my brush away, and then I will do my windmill again. Now too, your little spongy can dry out fairly quickly as well, so it can always go in a baggie. And if it does dry out more where it's getting really stiff, then just cut it off and start again with it. So dipped and blotted most of that off. And then come in here and blot. So see, that second coat way better than the first. So don't feel like the first coat has to be perfectly white. It's gonna build its color as you do each one. This one may even need a third, but I'll let it dry after and see what I think of it. So for the meantime, we're gonna let these dry here. And then we're gonna come in and do our staining because we only need to do 1 coat of these. So when you're staining, make sure if you've got something protecting your table that do one side as your paint side, because if you get some paint on your stain pieces, it doesn't come off very easily, and it is quite noticeable when you stain over top of it. So just flip your paper around and use one side for paint, one side for stain. All right, so lay out all your pieces that you're going to stain. And so when you're doing, so with this one in particular is the cutting board. Now it does not have any adhesive on the back, so I'm going to stain both sides. This one has adhesive, so does this one, and so does this one. So all of those pieces will just get the front, where everything else would get both sides. All right, so we're using a water-based stain, which will make these dry fairly quickly and does not smell. So you're gonna need your stain. You are going to need a foam brush, and you are going to need some sort of cloth to wipe. I like to use blue shop towels because they don't shed any lint. You know, if you have a old little t-shirt, something just that's absorbent and you know, this works perfect. If you had to in a pinch, a paper towel would be fine. You just might find that it might leave a little bit of a white fuzzy residue on your pieces, but okay, with the stain. So when I'm staining, I don't like to rely just on this tip and just kind of brush wherever, you'll see me flip it on its side and wipe it on, because then I have a lot more control. So I'm going to start with my big piece. Now once again, you're going to want to work in the direction of the grain, or if you can, at least wipe it back in the direction of the grain. So I'm going from side to side, and you can see I'm wiping it on instead of just letting the brush do that. So I can do it quicker, and I'm going to wipe this side before it has a chance to dry. If you have the surface just slightly damp, when you go to wipe it, it will blend a lot nicer. If you put it on too dry, then when you go to wipe it, it's not going to blend because it's already dry and there's nothing to move around. You could do both sides at once and then wipe it back, but sometimes if your gloves, you get too much stain on your gloves, then it can start to leave wet imprints on the other side, and sometimes it becomes blotchy. So I like to do one side at a time sometimes. Okay, so you can see the surface is slightly damp, and then I just come back and give that a wipe. Now I'm going to check the other side again because I was holding it. I want to make sure there was nothing that I left, and now this will dry. So stain will always lighten as it dries, where paint will always darken. So we're going to let that dry, and then we're going to come back and do the rest of these. So the easel stands, which you should have a bottom slot and a top slot, we're going to do both sides again. And these ones I'm just going to do both sides to stain them. And do both. And then just give them a wipe. Kind of wipe both sides at the same time, so then you can keep your hands free from leaving any prints, and just put them off to the side. Okay, so that's one side, that's the other. Now these little pieces as well, they'll get both sides. These are the hanging parts to the sign that hangs on the front of the wagon. And you can see I didn't even dip again for stain. There was enough stain in that brush for me to do these smaller bits. Okay. And same with this. I should have enough. So once again, lay it on its side and then just run it around. Back and wipe it off. Same with this one. Should have enough in there. Just be careful as you start handling some of these pieces that are a little bit more fragile. You just want to be a little bit more careful so as to not break them. Okay, so I'm just going to gently tap the tops. That way too, if I'm not dipping, I'm not getting a whole bunch of stain in between those grooves. I just really need to hit that surface. So that part is done there. Lay those ones there. Now this one I know that I don't quite have enough, so I'm just gonna dip it a little bit, wipe most of that off, and then I'm just gonna come in here and start doing this. Okay, so now I'm just going to get some wipe. And just watch these little insets here as I was squishing my brush. I wanted to leave a little bit. And I was just very careful as I was doing those letters that I wasn't squishing a whole bunch in there as well. Okay. So those ones are done, and we're going to leave those off to the side. And get rid of that. And since I'm done staining and I don't want any of the stain to get on anything else I'm doing, I'm going to flip that over again and go back to my painted side. Okay, so in that time, these have dried. So I'm just gonna come in here and check and see if I think that's enough. Now this one looks pretty good, and remember, it's gonna have a lot of stuff over top of it. So it's gonna hide a lot of those details. This one seems pretty good. I'm just gonna give it a sand here. And remember too, don't worry about filling in those grooves on the scoring part, because we're not gonna see that. Compared to where the lines, you're gonna need to see those because that's part of the detail of the sign. All right, so this one. Just looking at some good light, I think I'm okay with that. Now, if you want to distress any of the edges, now is the time to do this, because after, when we go to lay anything on there, you won't be able to do that. So I'm just going to come back here and wear around my edges. And that is not something you have to do. I just like how it just accents the edges and defines it a little bit more. So, all right, so that one's done. When I'm sanding the edges, I'm not necessarily hitting the rest of it, I'm just hitting the edges, so I'm not really creating any extra scratchy marks on that surface. And this one I'm going to give another sand. And I'm going to make sure that I can pop it out. And that looks pretty good. And I'm just going to take it out and give it a look and see if I'm happy with that. Yeah, I think I'm okay. So I'm just gonna take that off of its whole thing and let it be there. And now when we're doing these ones, now we can pull that tape off and we'll just have what we need to do on the other color. So now we will get started on the next one. Now you can see how fast this moves when you keep doing it in their light colors. You're not just doing one sign at a time, you're just doing all of the same color at a time, and then you can go back and assemble. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time to dry either. So this one here, I gotta run a piece of tape on the back. Now I'm peeking at this, and I can see a tiny little speckle. I'm not sure if you're gonna be able to see this. Okay. Probably not, but I can see that the adhesive isn't cut through all the way in just a tiny little spot. So I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to complete that. That way, if I go to push on this, it'll come out. And if it wasn't cut and you tried to push on it, there's a chance that you could damage the piece. It could break, depending how thick it is. So all I just needed to do is just complete that. So now if I push on it, yeah, it's going to come out just like that. Okay, so now I can put my tape on the back and then remove from the front. Now, if you wanted to do these in two colors, you know, just mask off like we did with this. Do one color, once it's done, pop it out, then you can do the other one, because eventually they're gonna come out anyway. So, all right, so now we're gonna get started on the next one. So find a clean spot on your paper towel and grab your next color. And we're gonna find our sponge. So a lot of these areas are small and there's really no need for me to start a new one. So I'm just gonna come in here, cut that off, and make sure I cut down far enough. And I'm gonna start with my gray color here. So as you can see, so that is a lot. If I went on there right now, it would seep down the sides, it would make a really big mess. So once again, a lot. Push that off, see how dry that is. And then you can come in very lightly pounce on those pieces. You want it to be almost dry, like you're stenciling, you have a really dry brush. Same thing with your foam wedge here. And you're not pressing that hard because you don't want to squish any extra paint that might be in the sponge. You're just delicately hitting the top of the wood. Because if you were, I'm going to try and see it so maybe you can see it on the side, because you could really squish and then you could force some stuff down the edge. So you don't want that. Now, if you painted these on, just ran some tape on your surface and folded that in half, made a loop, you could set these on here. But sometimes they just bounce on there. So we really try and make it as easy as possible when we're cutting these and assembling, that your pieces aren't all loose and you have to tape them all over the place. It's nice to paint in, it makes it easier for you guys to assemble, so that's why we do it this way. Because it's easier for me, which makes it easier for you. So. Don't worry about the first coat covering up solid, because we're going to do a second one. You should still see some of that light wood color underneath. Okay, that one's done, and now here. See, and that little bit of paint that's left in your sponge goes a long way. So as you can see, I'm really not making a dent in my little paint stash here. All right, so those are drying. Now let's come back here and check the first one. So these are one of the first pieces. They're already dried. That's how little paint is needed and how fast it can dry. So once again, feel it, make sure they're nice and smooth. Make sure you can pop them out of your little template there. That one's dry already too. Yep. So by sanding, it's definitely lightened it up a bit, and it has brought out some of the wood color, but that's okay because the second coat will go on a lot nicer, and we'll cover up all of that there. So once again, just repeat what we just did. That is done, and cover that up. And I'm just gonna let those dry for a second, and I'm just gonna check on my stained pieces. Now the ones that are done on both sides, they're a little bit dampish still. but so I'm just gonna give those an extra minute. These ones in the front are just good. So as I'm sanding, we'll get this all ready to put together. Now, for some reason, when you're done painting and you can't get to assembling it today, that's fine. When these are done drying and you've sanded them, then pop them out of their template so they don't stay in here all night, just in case one does happen to stick in there. At least it's out and you don't have to worry about that. You're gonna have to pop them out anyways in order to assemble, so they'll just sit there on the table anyways. So very gently, careful as you go over those letters so you don't catch one of them. And I'm just going to distress my edges a little bit. Okay, so that one is good. Give that a wipe off. And come in here, these little pieces. Sometimes it's easier just to hold the piece and hold the sandpaper and move the piece back and forth on it. And I'm realizing as I'm sanding this easel that I don't even need it for this kit. So that's fine. It'll just be an extra piece that'll be done for another kit. But if you ever have an easel in your kit, you'll just stick it together like that. And then you can set your round sign on there. So that's what it's for. We don't need it, so we're just gonna put it off to the side. Carefully as you go around. Distress the edges if you wish. And then give it a wipe. Same with this one, just gently hold on to that. Alright, the cutting board will be good enough, so I'm just going to give it a sand. And distress those edges. And you can sand both sides. Shaking the table. Apologize guys, because it's probably jiggling the camera. And then give that a wipe. Alright, so these should be dry. I'm going to give them a gentle sand there. Take the tape off. Now don't throw those templates away because you're going to still need them to assemble your kit. But this is what you would do if you couldn't assemble it today. This one wants to get stuck, so let's see what. Oh, here we go. Okay. You would just leave the pieces out of their template like that. Don't worry about the inner piece of the A. We don't need that one anymore. So that can go in the garbage. Just pop those out. Need to use something to gently push those out. There they are. Okay, so we need that template. Let's stick that over here. Garbage, need that one. Make sure the inners come out as well. Okay, so these pieces can go. All right. So now it is assembly time. Okay, so let's begin with this one here. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna grab your frame first. We need to get this on here. So make sure you got it centered before we grab the other round and put it inside. So this one has adhesive, so take that and gently peel off on the back. So when you do it, sometimes if it wants to lift the adhesive, just rub that cover back, give it a rub, and then gently peel that off. Okay, so now you can find sides. I'm just gently laying it over top and kind of guiding it with my fingers. You don't want to press it too hard or anything. You want to make sure it's in place before you decide to give it a good press, because once it's in place, there's no taking it off without ruining the piece. So I'm feeling like it's centered all the way around. So once that's good, then I'm going to give it a press. Okay, so that one is on. Next, you'll take your template. Now, you want to, because the lines are on the back of this one, you really need to make sure they're going straight when you center this. So get your template in there and then really look to make sure that the lines are going straight through the A and not twisted like that, because you'll definitely notice when you lift it up that they're crooked. So definitely when you have lines in there, make sure your design is straight and even. Okay, so what I'm going to do first, so this doesn't twist, I'm going to put my center in. So I'm going to do my arrows. So I'm going to gently hold it. When you start to peel it off, you don't want to touch the adhesive because you can stick it to your fingers and then you can pull it off back. Just gently try and hold it on the sides. Now, double checking, make sure you haven't bumped your design here. And off, see, now you can see that it is you need it. Okay, now you can put that back on. And now you can start to do the other pieces. Okay, so now we'll just continue to take that backing off and press them into place. That's what's so nice about this with the adhesive cut at the back is that you don't have to worry about using super glue, getting that all over your fingers. It's a lot cleaner. That's what we do this for you guys. Okay, and you can see why that template is so useful, because if you had to try and guess where those pieces went, you would never get it that even. So that is the first one. Doesn't that look good? It wasn't that easy to do. All right, piece number 2. So this one is going to get lined up on the right hand side here, and then we're going to come back in and we're going to line up the second set of pieces in the inside. So lay these down on the table. Sometimes it comes in one piece, sometimes it's two, depending on where the seam is when we're putting the adhesive on. So this one wants to lift some of that, so I'm just going to rub that back gently. Just got to be careful when you go around these pieces here, because they will tend to rip. So just gently wiggle it down. Once again, try not to touch that surface so it gets stuck to your fingers. Okay, now grab your piece. This particular one is getting lined up here, so I'm just hovering above, and it might make contact, but I haven't pressed on it, so it's definitely still able to move it. Make sure that is centered. That edge is even. Okay, and now give it a press. Okay, so that one is done. Okay, so the next part is to put these pieces in. So chicken, egg, and the cow. So I'm putting their templates in first, and then I'm coming back and grabbing their pieces. Now just watch, this one's got some very delicate details at the bottom, so when you're pulling on that, just be careful. Okay, you see how that wants to lift it up, so just give it a rub, and there we go. Okay, peel that one off. Set that one in. Set that one in. Okay, and then flip those over and pop those out. So that's piece number 2 down. Okay, so let's get rid of those. Okay, next is the cutting board. Let's see, got a little bit of little spot on there. There we go. Okay. So the next one, we didn't cut it so it lines up completely through the whole thing, because this is only sitting up at the top. So you're just gonna find where that curve matches the template there, and then you'll put the pieces in. All right, so I'm gonna start with the windmill because I want to make sure if I needed to pivot this a little bit. I only have to do it with one piece. So gently peel back. There we go. Okay, so I'm just gonna hold this into place first. Okay, so you want to make sure it's straight, but it should also match up on the curves at the side. We didn't go all the way up. And then you're just going to set it certain way to go in, is that it? There we go. Okay. So I haven't pressed on it yet. Just want to make sure. I'm going to pull this off because I don't want those letters to be crooked. So it's crooked at the bottom there. Getting a nice shadow, so it's not helping me. So, okay, there we go. So I'm just going to pull it off so that piece is lined up. Put that back. And so now if you need to just twist it ever so slightly, make sure it's straight. You can do that. There we go. Just pulling it that way. So see, because I only have one piece, I can move it so it's even there. Just place that in. So sometimes when you're placing it, it'll fall in the template and then it wants to stick. So just be very careful and try and line it up as best you can. It does that for me sometimes too. So you can pull that off and that one's done. Alright, so that one is there. And now this one. Now you can either go in like this and line them up over top, which I'm going to do this time so you guys can see how that works. Now sometimes I'll cut it like this with no score marks in the back, so then you can just easily lay it on top and it'll be fine. Sometimes we'll just cut them in here because it's easier to paint, but then you'll use the score marks to center your pieces over top. Now these are the score marks. You don't want to line it right off at the edge because we offset it so it doesn't appear after once you get your piece on. It really should just be a guide to lay over top, and once you get it on, you shouldn't even know that there is markings underneath if you laid it on top enough. So just get some good light. Best in here with the shadows, but just be careful when you're pushing these ones around, you don't break it. Okay, so that one's good. So we're just going to press that one into place. So once you see that it's no lines on either side, then you can give it its press. And then just continue on with the next ones. take a little longer, but sometimes you do need to have the score mark, so that's why we're just showing you how to do this. I'm just gonna go check that in the light, guys. Okay, so I'm good with that. So I laid them on top and I didn't really press on them. Once I went into the light, I double checked to make sure they were all where they're supposed to be. Now do the same thing on this side. All right, once again, I'll be right back. All right, those look good to me as well, so I'm just gonna give that a press. All right, and now we're all done. See, if I lined this up, probably would fit in there. So by hand placing, I got, you know, pretty good there, but I can't see any of the score lines, so they are as even as they can get. So yeah, there, we're all done. So I hope this video helps you guys in how we paint and assemble our kits. Those little tips and tricks will hopefully make it easier for you. And if you have any questions, you can always shoot us a message on any of our social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, email, any of that stuff, and we can definitely help you as you're doing your projects. All right, guys, thanks.